friends. I decided to film all 3 of the videos I wanted to do this week in one day. That way I can do other things during the rest of the week. So now I'm going to read the 3rd story from It Came from the Multiplex. This story is called Negative Creep, and it is by Alvaro Zinos-Amaro. Chop, chop, dickweed. The burly orderly jostles Daniel. Daniel's stainless steel cuffs clink, and he resumes the long march down the dreary hall leading to his new residence. Patients at the Arvada Sanatorium, formerly the Colorado State Psychiatric Institute, call this infamous cell Silent Night. Dr. Sapperman pushes a gray medication cart. Daniel closes his eyes, relishing the sound of its squeaky wheels. 10 feet from Silent Night, he stops, falling to his knees. "Oh, fuck this," the orderly says. Strong hands grip Daniel's underarms and yank him off the floor, dragging him the remaining distance. A final shove slams him inside Silent Night's padded white interior. Dr. Sapperman lifts up a clipboard from his cart and with gleeful fastidiousness makes a notation. "You don't look so hot, kid," he says. The words remind Daniel of some movie he saw years ago, involving dream warriors. He doesn't respond. His vocal cords are shot from a night of screaming and raving. Not that much sound would get through the muzzle anyway. "We good?" the orderly asks. The doctor stares at Daniel. "Behave," he says, "and we'll remove the cuffs tomorrow." Dr. Sapperman nods at the orderly, and the orderly pushes the heavy door, which begins its ponderous inward swing. When it enters Daniel's field of vision, the door's small, double-paned, mesh-grid window offers a refracted view of the 2 men, appearing now as wavering homunculi. Homunculi. I've seen the word before, but I don't know if I've ever heard it said. Moving on. As the heavy door moves toward the latch, Daniel loses himself in time, surrendering to the infinitely satisfying whine of its rusty hinges, measuring out his heartbeats until 1 week earlier. "I don't think it was murder," Jared said, lowering his gaze. "Dawn never hurt a soul, and they didn't even take her wallet." The 4 of them sat in Daniel's beat-up Buick Skyhawk, barely glancing at the images projected on the huge movie screen 5 car rows ahead. Daniel couldn't remember a time when gathering at the 88 Drive-In had ever been somber until today. "Welcome to Ludlow," a tinny voice said on the car stereo. "Hope your time here will be a happy one." His speech was punctuated by a beat of silence and then the heavy roar of a rumbling long-haul truck. Daniel dialed down the sound. Rhonda fidgeted in the seat behind Jared. She had been fighting with her mom. "Maybe Dawn took her own life," she said. "How dare you?" Daniel asked, biting off each word. "Easy," Tara said from the seat behind Daniel's. "We're just trying to figure this thing out, Danny boy. We're all on edge, okay? So cut us some slack." Her voice went up. "Am I the only one who's been hearing weird sounds recently?" "Oh shit," Jared said. "Kinda like static, but denser somehow," Rhonda said. "It's happened to me twice." "A hum that gets louder and louder," Tara said. "A voice underneath?" "Stop it," Daniel said. "This is not the time to be losing our goddamn minds. Didn't you just come back from a weekend in the mountains, Tara? So maybe it was your ears popping." "And me?" Rhonda said. "Your headaches. Migraines can do that," Daniel muttered. "Jesus Christ, I did not imagine I heard it too," Jared interrupted. "Whatever got to Dawn could be coming for us next." Tara leaned forward. "What makes you say that, Jared?" In the rearview mirror, Daniel studied Tara's expression. Her dark brown eyes had a melancholy cast, and her long black hair seemed to have lost its usual luster. But she was still in control. That made him angry. "My sister and Dawn were like best friends, and she gave me something," Jared said. "I don't know, I guess she didn't want the cops to have it." "Well, what is it?" Tara asked. Daniel's fingers wrapped themselves around the Buick's steering wheel. You've had something from Dawn this whole time and you're only telling us now? That's not fair, Tara chided. It's only been 3 days, Jared said, looking away. Daniel swallowed. He forced his hands to ease up, color slowly filling in his knuckle whites. Feels like a hell of a lot longer, he said. Rhonda reached forward and placed her hand on Jared's shoulder. Did you bring it with you? Jared grabbed his school bag and pulled out a small violet box. It had Dawn's name written on the lid's flower-shaped sticker. With exaggerated reverence, Jared opened the box and pulled out a notebook. My sister found it in Dawn's room when she searched for her that night. Sort of a diary, he said. Shame tinged his cheeks magenta. I just skimmed it. Rhonda said, maybe there's something in there about her family. Daniel turned in his seat. For the last time, he said. She didn't fucking kill herself. Dawn's issues with her mom were nothing like yours with your dad. Rhonda flinched, then averted her gaze. Jerk, she mumbled. Tara fixed her eyes squarely on the notebook. May I? Jared passed it to her. Tara flipped through its pages, eyes roving hungrily. Daniel waited for anything to happen, waited for his life to go back to how it had been, knowing it never would. Up on the theater screen, a man picked up a cat, and an Orinco tanker rushed by. Guys, I think there may be some clues in here, Tara said a minute later. Dawn says she thought there might be someone or something stalking her. She talks about her hippie parents having been involved with some weird New Age group in Manitou Springs. She suspected they performed a ritual and something went wrong. A force was unleashed and... Let me see that, Daniel snapped, snatching the diary. After a few seconds, he realized its scrawl was a struggle to decipher. Embarrassed, he closed it. Go on. Like I was saying, Tara continued, unfazed, Dawn believed that this group her parents fell in with tapped into some kind of energy from another realm, and once it crossed over to our world, it was somehow drawn to movies, a kind of electromagnetic resonance. That's why she went to the landmark that night. She was trying to steal film reels to perform an experiment. Jared frowned. That sounds pretty far out, he said. Maybe Dawn was, troubled in ways we didn't know about. You know what, Jared? Daniel said, face twisted into a grimace. It takes a schizo to know one. Jared drew back. His face fell and he blinked back tears. Shit, Danny, give it up already, Tara said. Daniel heaved a massive breath and counted off seconds. Then he said, Look, man, I'm sorry. I didn't mean it, okay? But the truth was that a part of him had meant it. Daniel hadn't wanted to believe the rumors that started up during the second semester of junior high, but when Jared returned to school, after his parents pulled him out for over a month, he had to admit he saw his friends in a different light. It took a few moments for Jared to accept the peace offering. When they shook hands, Daniel noticed Jared's clamminess and withdrew a little too quickly. Better, Tara said. Look, Danny, we know you had a thing for Dawn. I get it. It's hard. But she was our friend too. Try to keep that in mind. Fuck you, thought Daniel, but held quiet. There was nothing to say. Tara would never understand the depth of his feelings for Dawn, and the regret he'd have to live with for the rest of his life for having been too much of a coward to act on them. Maybe if he'd been braver, things would have played out differently. Heck, Dawn might still be alive today. The conversation continued, but Daniel was no longer listening. He felt mummified by grief. With tremendous effort, he pierced the gauze of numbness and tried again to read the diary. This time the letters came together. On the last few pages, he noticed a reoccurring symbol he'd missed the first time. It looks like this. He lifted up the diary and pointed at the symbol. Did you see this? Yes, Tara said. No idea what it means. So we agree, Rhonda said, continuing the exchange Daniel zoned out on. Until we know more, we stay away from movies and TV. It can't hurt, Jared said. Right, Tara said. Daniel? He swallowed. Sure, whatever, but the diary stays with me. Jared was on the cusp of speaking, but Tara intervened. Fine, she said. It's yours for 24 hours, and then it goes back to Jared so he can return it to his sister. Daniel looked at the movie screen. Characters were wandering through a macabre graveyard. He changed the radio to a rock station. Let's get the hell out of here, he said, and started up the engine. I've got it, Tara yelled, picking up the upstairs receiver before her brother had the chance to interfere. It's me, Daniel said. He sounded distant. I had a feeling you were going to call, Tara whispered. A pause. You did? I can't explain it. I've been thinking about the diary ever since you dropped us off at Tony's diner. Something about that symbol. Yeah, Daniel said. It gets under your skin. Tara visualized it now. It danced on her retinas. Entranced, she said nothing. Actually, that's what I'm calling about, Daniel said. I think I figured it out, or a part of it. Dawn was onto something, but I think she had it backwards. The thing does react to films, but it isn't drawn to them, it's repelled by them. As though on cue, sounds from a trashy movie Tara's brother was watching in the living room drifted up the staircase. It hadn't been exactly difficult for Tara to turn him down for Sleepaway Camp 3 Teenage Wasteland, the latest tape he'd borrowed from Daniel, and now to think that if Daniel was right, she might have to watch it herself and actually do the babysitting she'd promised her parents. Outrageous. Let's all sing a rousing camp song, a film voice says. Does anyone know I'm a happy camper? Tara said, what did Dawn want with the film reels? That part's confusing, Daniel said. But I think she was trying to figure out if messing around with film, playing it in reverse, projecting a negative, whatever, would have had any effect on the entity. His voice became hushed. You were right, Tara. Dawn wrote about a sound only she could hear. She wondered if she was losing her marbles or if it was something more. So what makes you think the movies ward this thing off? Dawn used the symbol more often when she was alone, in silence. When she watched something, the entity wasn't around, Daniel said. Tara straightened a strand of hair. Maybe it's not just movies then, she said. Maybe it's any kind of sound or noise. Daniel's breathing quickened. The words tumbled out of him. That could fit. When she was killed in the theater, it was dark and quiet and she was alone, and the projection booth is soundproofed. Can you tell Jared and Rhonda right away? They need to have sound around them at all times. When Tara left Tony, she had gotten the impression that Rhonda was enjoying Jared's company and wasn't eager to go home. With luck, they'd still be at the diner. She'd grabbed some of the VHS tapes her brother borrowed from Daniel to give to Rhonda and Jared as ammunition, and listened to her Walkman on the way. Okay, she said, what are you going to do? I'm going to test our theory, he said. It isn't fair, Jared thought as he stepped into the shower, radio blaring from the sink-adjacent shelf. As the hot water sprayed against his blonde hair and fair skin, he wondered for the umpteenth time if the torture inside his head would ever let up. For a while after the therapy his parents arranged for him, he'd been doing better. He'd felt in control of his desires, but recently his instincts reasserted themselves, seemingly stronger than ever, and his inner defenses were crumbling. Was thinking about boys really a sin? Didn't everyone fantasize one way or another? And now, he thought as he grabbed the soap and lathered himself, everything was even more messed up. He'd suspected for a while that Daniel was into Dawn, but hearing it from Tara today finally made it real. God, what a fool he'd been to think that he and Daniel could ever share something special. Not only that, but Rhonda started sending Jared signals, subtle when the four of them had been in the car, unmistakable when it was just them at the diner. He'd have to make excuses too. He walks on, he doesn't look back, the voice on the radio sang, seemingly tapping into his thoughts. He pretends he can't hear her. He was so sick of that new single, they were playing it to death. Without warning, he heard the door to the bathroom open. Jared, I told you, you can't use my radio in here, his sister harumphed. A second later, the door closed, and she and the music were gone. Tara's warning rang loudly in Jared's mind. No matter what, keep some kind of sound on around you at all times. Promise me. He'd tried watching the tapes Tara had given him, apparently part of Daniel's collection, but had soon discovered they weren't his speed. He only made it 15 minutes into Student Bodies and less than 10 into Graduation Day, and he'd barely endured the main title sequence of Splatter University before deciding he just needed to cleanse himself with a shower. At least the water jet was pretty loud. Just to be safe, he made it stronger and hotter. His body flushed at the surge. Surprisingly, his frustration began to melt away. He was going to stop trying to live up to what the others expected from him and just be himself, he decided. The enormous pressure he'd been carrying in his neck and temples for days now lightened. Lathering up some more, he let his hands dwell on his groin. Was it such a bad thing? how he'd missed it. He'd longed for it. The relief, the feeling of being whole and alive. He started stroking himself. The soft, pleasurable moan that followed was buried under the showerhead's steady jet. His hand moved with increasing speed. God, he was seconds away from release. It had been too long. He closed his eyes and slowed down in anticipation. The showerhead sputtered. Droplets dribbled, and then nothing. Just my luck, Jared thought. The old showerhead must have gotten clogged. He was so close. Screw it. He started again. That's when he heard it. No, felt it. Not a sound anywhere specific, but somehow everywhere at once. An enveloping curtain, a change in the air pressure. He opened his eyes and became immediately flaccid. "Mom?" he called out, his voice feeling tiny. "Is that you?" Keep it together, he told himself. He tried banging on the shower head. It rattled and hiccuped a small flurry of water, but that was it. Shivering, he grabbed his towel and stepped out of the shower, trying to think of something to sing. That was when the presence returned. It was stronger this time, a palpable force with a distinct pitch and vibration. The sound coalesced into an energy that seemed to seep into his skin and rummage through his insides. Riding the whirlwind were countless voices, memories, untold histories. One of the voices rose above the others. "A bath will make me feel better." Blasted. "Will you wait with her while I clean up?" "Mom?" Jared cried out again, knowing full well it wasn't his mom, but he could no longer hear himself. The wall of noise was all-encompassing now, simultaneously outside and inside him. "Each of you were selected because you have this mark on your arm." Every syllable hammered at Jared's brain. "What the fuck?" he croaked. "Leave me alone!" His arm shot up and down, casting loose the towel, trying to fend off his foe, but finding nothing to strike. "One of you is a werewolf." That symbol boomed. Somewhere beyond the turbulence of his panic and sense of unshakable doom, Jared's mind flashed a glimmer of recognition. Those words sounded familiar. Where had he heard them before? Wasn't it a movie? A recent flick about werewolves? Yes, they'd watched it at Daniel's place. He remembered now. Howling 5, the rebirth. But why would... The symbol returned, inescapable, drowning out the world, obliterating everything Jared had ever known. Rhonda fidgeted in her room, trying to find distraction in the VHSs Tara forced on her at the diner. Girl, what dreck. As much as she appreciated Tara's practical thinking, couldn't she have found something better for her than Bloody Birthday, Mother's Day, and Happy Birthday to Me? She wondered if Jared was having better luck with his titles. They were also from Daniel's collection, so probably not. Still, she found herself picturing Jared lying down on the couch, head tilted dreamily, smiling that lopsided smile of his that dimpled his cheeks. His blue eyes. Stop it, Rhonda, she told herself. The whole point of watching this crap. Besides, if Daniel and Tara's theory was correct, the small business of survival was to keep her mind off Jared. It was clear from his behavior at the diner that he wasn't interested. She sighed. Enough of this. She needed to clear her head. Remembering her promise to Tara, she started up her Discman and put on her headphones. Janet Jackson's peppy Rhythm Nation 1814 lifted her mood. Remembering that her Discman had been skipping lately, she tucked her Walkman into one of her overall pockets as backup. Knowing her dad would disapprove of a solo expedition after sunset, she snuck out through the garage. She walked fast in the cool evening air. How silly, she thought, to have gotten worked up over Jared. There was so much more to life. Her crush would pass. Just then, Miss You Much piped through her headphones, and she rolled her eyes at fate's irony. 2 songs later, she noticed the Discman was warm in her hand. Damn, she thought, here we go. Sure enough, it started skipping. She stopped, pulled out her Walkman, and smoothly transferred the headphones over. She pushed the Walkman's play button. Nothing happened. What the hell? She said. She took out the tape, spooled it with her pinky to make sure it was working, and reinserted it. The air seemed to have grown colder. Come on, she thought, and hit play, again, hard. Still no dice. Then a scythe of sound felled the silence around her. The fleeting blow with a presence that shouldn't have been there sent her tumbling back. Nerves frayed, she launched into an off-key rendition of a childhood lullaby. Then she decided to check the Walkman's battery compartment because even though she'd put new batteries in only 3 days before, what the heck else could it be? Behind the little plastic cover, she found a paper strip and no batteries. Irritatingly familiar print spelled out a message on the paper strip. "We talked about you listening to this kind of stuff. Let this be a lesson. Love, Dad." You have to be fucking kidding me, Rhonda thought. So her dad snooped through her stuff again, and her tape hadn't met with his moral standards. In fact, the tape was a gift from Dawn from her visit to Europe, where she'd been lucky enough to attend the Fanta Festival in Rome. There she'd illicitly recorded an hour's worth of the soundtrack to the cult movie Tetsuo, the Iron Giant. Rhonda chose the tape specifically because the movie's audio was an insane, impenetrable wall of noise, the perfect shield. And now her dad ruined everything. She screamed, and then thought, I just have to keep wailing while running home. She turned in the direction of her house and sprinted. Keeping up her holler while running at top speed, though, was tough. Catching her breath for a moment, she felt it again, a bubble around her, sucking out ordinary silence and replacing it with a grotesque, distorted version of itself that somehow clamored inside her mind. It was so concussive and all-pervasive, she could hardly hear her own thoughts. "Get on the snake where the water turns to steam," Symbol howled. "Get on the snake with a suicide machine." She yelled at the top of her lungs, expecting to pierce her own ears with the shrill, rending cry, but she heard only a faint, muffled echo. Screeching again, she ran and ran and ran until an invisible something thrust out before her right foot, sending her tumbling down headfirst on the sidewalk. As she fell, her left arm shot out in an attempt to soften the fall. Her body slammed onto the ground, and her left wrist snapped from the blow, firing a lightning pulse of pain through her body. She was momentarily blinded as the right side of her face ate the pavement. Dizzy pain ricocheting in every fiber of her being, she moaned and twisted on her side. Her brain told her mouth to move, but only a sickening gurgle arose. A crushing, soundless boom locked the world in its sonic shackles. "The sheaves have all been brought," Symbol bellowed, "but the fields have washed away." Rhonda felt the walls of sound closing in, excavating out the air and universe all around her, compressing her from all sides until there was nowhere left to go. "Consider it a work in progress," Tara said. Daniel rubbed his hands for warmth. Despite blasting the radio in his Skyhawk during the midnight drive to this abandoned barn, every little noise on the way spooked him. At least now the film playing on the barn wall that Tara had rigged into a projection area provided a steady stream of sound, but thinking about everything that had happened over the last week still chilled his core. Half-interestedly, he examined the pile of tapes near the projector, titles like Night of the Comet, Street Trash, The Stuff, and Of Unknown Origin, all which he'd loaned to Tara's younger brother and which Tara had been nice enough to haul out here. Daniel brought a couple of boxes himself, but they were still in the car. His gaze wandered to the flickering movie image. "I don't think we need to break up a family, do we, Pumpkin?" said a creepy-looking dude. Daniel couldn't help but think about his own sundered tribe. First Dawn, now Jared and Rhonda. His brain couldn't handle it. Even worse, he knew the cops would want to speak to him and Tara soon. "If we really want to make this place a safe haven," Daniel said, "and play movies 24/7, we're going to need help." "Agreed," Tara said. She glanced back at the barn entrance. "Guess I'm not the only one who's nervous," Daniel thought. "We need to get to the bottom of whatever this creature wants," he said. "Otherwise, we're just delaying the inevitable." The experiment in his closet had nearly cost him his life. He suppressed a tremor as he remembered his encounter with Symbol. "I let it get close to me, Tara, and I wrote down what it said. It seems to be parroting back whatever it hears. Films, songs. What I don't get is why." Tara regarded him with eyes on the brink of an abyss. "Danny, do you ever feel like our lives are heading down the wrong path somehow?" Daniel frowned. "Meaning?" "Like, we're getting lost. Before we started high school, life was so simple, but now we have Walkmans and CD players, personal computers, camcorders, Nintendo. My dad even has a car phone." "What's wrong with that?" A shadow flitted over Tara's face. Daniel blinked and it was gone. "What if," she said, "we've reached some kind of critical mass of distraction and we need to be reminded to pay attention?" Daniel bit his lower lip. What does mirroring back sound fragments, he said, impatient welling within, have to do with paying attention? For a split second, Tara thought she heard Symbol. This time it wasn't like at the mountains or the other times since. She held herself very still. I think it wants us to listen, she said. It wants us to understand that if we never spend time alone with our thoughts, we'll eventually go insane and die. Again, Daniel noticed her look back at the barn entrance. At that moment, the movie playing on the barn wall, The Stepfather, Daniel remembered, kicked into high gear with the sound of a police siren gradually intruding on the scene and drowning out the dialogue. Except Daniel thought as he watched the scene there was no cop car in the frame. A moment later, a voice blasted through a megaphone and the barn door burst open. Daniel Escalante, a police officer barked, gun drawn. You're under arrest on suspicion of the murders of Don Hayes, Jared Cruz, and Rhonda Watkins. What? No, Shaking, he turned to Tara. You set me up, didn't you? You planned this whole thing. They cuffed him. Son, you don't want to make this any harder than it has to be. We don't know how you did it, but each of the victims had VHS tapes with your fingerprints on them. You're coming with us. How could you, Tara? Daniel yelled as they escorted him out. You made some kind of deal with it, didn't you? He ranted. Tara shook her head sadly and reached out for a hug, which the nearest officer was happy to supply. It's so awful, she said, sobbing. He used to be such a good guy. I just think he maybe watched too many of those sick movies. She pointed to the stack of tapes near the projector and felt a shiver of pleasure. Now. The door at last finishes its ponderous arc and clicks shut. From inside his cell, Daniel hears Dr. Sapperman secure the 3 bolt locks, sees him smirk an officious grin, and disappear into the murk beyond. Despite his muzzle, Daniel tries to scream, but his sore vocal cords produce only a hoarse, raspy whisper. He clinks his handcuffs together until they begin to slice into his skin. He takes a step back and jumps against the cell's padded wall, bouncing off and landing on the padded floor with a dull thud. He stands up and does it again, and again, and again. He goes on and on until he's panting for air. Lying on the ground now, he feels completely drained, too tired to even sit. Finally, Daniel blinks. He blinks as many times as he can, focusing on the almost inaudible sound of his batting eyelashes. In time, his eyelids sting and burn so that he can blink no longer. He closes his eyes. At last, he accepts his new world of complete and utter silence. It doesn't take long. The voice slashes right through him. This is getting to be, drones Symbol. The end. Next week, we will be on story number 4 called Helluloid, which sounds delightful. Thanks for listening, friends, and I'll talk to you all soon. Bye.